Today on In Good Faith, it really is a privilege to have in studio, not over the phone line or whatever, but right here in person, Dr. Pamela Ebstyne King. Pam, thank you so much for coming in today.
Oh, Steve, thank you so much for having me. It's a joy to be here, in person especially.
As a bit of background, she's the Peter L. Benson Professor of Applied Developmental Science at the Fuller School of Psychology in Pasadena and the Executive Director of the Thrive Center for Human Development. So we've got lots of cool stuff to talk about. And her primary research interests lie at the intersection of thriving and spiritual development, which she has conducted, funded by the Biologos Foundation, John Templeton Foundation, and Tyndale House. She's ordained in the Presbyterian Church of the United States and has led high school and college ministries for various community organizations and churches. Wow. We are lucky to have you.
Well, I'm grateful to be here.
Well, and that you have dealt with college ministries, but we are lucky to have you because you came to speak here on campus, both a public forum that anyone can come to, but especially students. And did you always care about students and ministry? Was that always part of what was important to you?
Yeah, I love students. I think that I'm captivated by human transformation and hopefully growth and thriving and joy in these good things. And I find university students, college students, grad students asking such big, great questions around meaning and seeking questions around identity and belonging, and also really being intentional about creating skills for contribution. That it's just such a fervent time of life. I've just really been drawn to coming alongside, teaching, pastoring, caring for, mentoring, doing research on that age group. So
it seems to me that it takes a particular kind of maybe charity and love. Well, I guess they're the same thing, depending on what you're translating from, that every year you may get some of the same questions and not just roll your eyes like, oh, this again, but you think, aha, they've arrived at this point.
Yes, I've never thought of it that way, but that's great. That is true. I love it. It always feels like a privilege to come alongside students in asking those questions. And as my career has evolved, I do less teaching, and I really miss it when I'm not. And I'm really excited because next year I'm going to be back in the classroom because it's just wonderful to wrestle very personally with students. I very much enjoy that.
Now, because you live in Pasadena, I have to ask about the fires.
Yes, you do.
And this has affected your very area.
Yes, it has. It has been extraordinarily humbling. I have my home, my street. We only had one crushed car by a tree and other fallen trees, but which was nothing compared to 2 miles away from my home, where square miles of homes and churches and congregations and schools and businesses have been eradicated. I had a close friend who, when the firefighters were told to leave and didn't have sufficient water, had fires on her property and her garage was burning down, and family and friends showed up just dumping buckets of water from their pool on trees that were on fire. And so being in the midst of that and just seeing on the horizon black plumes of smoke going up, knowing that was a house blocks away, that just, and in 10 minutes the smoke would stop, and then the next. Seeing something completely annihilated is really, from a sensational, it's very overwhelming. It's such a catastrophe.
Yeah, it gets first billing on the news, the main slot. But can I ask spiritually about this? Because I can see people saying, oh, I'm so grateful to God. Our home was spared. Our prayers were answered. And that's such a hard phrase to hear if your house is now gone. And it's like, we were praying too.
Right, exactly. So things like, oh, we're so blessed that our house is saved. That's a really hard phrase for me right now, because does that mean most of my friends whose homes weren't saved, or whose homes are still standing but are so smoke impacted they probably will not be able to return to them? Are they not blessed? I don't think so. This has been a very good moment to kind of update my theology on God's presence, and I've really had to remind myself and re-embrace that God is with us no matter what is happening. And that doesn't mean our houses don't burn, but God is with us even in that grief and loss. And there are reality, like I'm talking about putting out fires. okay, my friend's probably not ever going to go back to that home, even though it's still standing. And it's a beautiful home. I have so many friends who have no home. Their whole street, minus a house, is obliterated. Will they ever want to go back to the rebuild in 4 or 5 years? And you mentioned media. There's so much energy and excitement and people giving away clothes, and now there's too much clothes that we don't know what to do with. And then media goes away and all that adrenaline is gone, and people still don't have homes. And there's 50 people showing up if a house goes on the market or a rental becomes available, because there's just nowhere to go. And it makes you appreciate as a human being how meaningful homes are and the significance of material space. I've often thought like, oh, home is where the heart is. We're above that material thing. But it's made me realize that spaces which are imbued with memories and relationships and history and experiences really are vessels of meaning for us. And when you have whole neighborhoods that are interwoven with interactions and history, when those are gone, that space that was like the loom on which that meaning and those relationships were knitted together, that I don't know how that gets recreated.
Yeah. Well, if they need to learn about thriving and spirituality, we know someone they can talk to. This is your research about thriving and spirituality. In just a minute, I want to maybe ask about spiritual beginnings for you, but where did you first put these things together? Because I think of developing a spiritual life, but then thriving, how are they different?
Great question.
And complementary.
Right. Yes. So I'll say where it began for me is I grew up in a Presbyterian church in the Midwest. We had a basement. And of course, they put the teenagers in the basement. And I just remember sitting on some used old couch with my youth group and my pastor talking about John 10:10, about Jesus saying, I've come that you might have life in its fullness. And I was like, that sounds good. What the heck does that mean? And literally that was the 80s. And over the years, I've seen different interpretations of fullness or abundance. If it's prosperity and finance and success, or if it's meaning or connection or relationship with God. And so I think really honestly, pretty early in my life, I started really wondering and imagining like, what is fullness of life? And what does Jesus have to do with that? And I am one who observed and experienced like, wow, life is great in my high school. I was really engaged and we were Titans and I loved being a Titan and the big story about being a Titan. But there was something unique about the sacred story that I was a part of, and this community of people who loved me no matter what, and this God who loved me no matter what.
And you believed that when you heard it?
I believed that.
You felt it?
I did. I did. And so over the years, I just kept kind of wondering, reflecting, and then beginning to intellectually chase, what does fullness mean? And then curiosity, like how do we come into that? I wanted to say get it, but I don't think it's something we get. I think it's something we receive. It's a very reciprocal, our relationship with God and how we interact with God, how we interact with God through our faith community, through our spiritual practices, through our vocation and calling is something that's quite dynamic. So,
do you find faith communities that you may visit or that you hear about sometimes don't know how they could increase thriving in community? What kind of things?
Yeah, I do. So just to get a little more specific on your question, I ended up going into ministry right after college. I studied psychology at Stanford, ended up out of convenience pursuing a master's of divinity, pursuing ordination, and then ended up having so many questions in psychology. I ended up doing a PhD in marriage and family studies, and was really obsessed with human development in the context of systems, whether it's family system or cultural or religious system. And so I started to develop this lens of seeing people both psychologically and understanding spiritual journeys, like what is happening from a psychological perspective. And then what's the theology? So when I go to churches or faith communities, I'm really struck how psychologically naive people are. And if they could use psychology to understand how people could thrive and become more full of life, it would really help their faith experience.
Is that something you could pick maybe a person who's a conglomeration or maybe a particular person and talk about that process that you've seen or someone might experience?
Wow. Okay, let's think about that really personally. I have someone in mind, but it's Martin Luther King because I just did a podcast on that and was really interested in his life. But I don't know a ton about his life, so I'm not sure that's a great example. Can I talk about my own life?
Please.
I think that can be my own lab.
You're
here.
Our guest.
Yeah. Well. Okay. Well, no. Okay. So I did a study. One of my earlier studies was actually studying young people around the world who were nominated for living with profound spirituality in their culture. So I had kids in Mumbai, India, Nairobi, Lima, Peru, Beirut, Northern Ireland, England, United States. I think that's all the countries. I got all the continents minus Antarctica. These were interviews that were conducted in person. So I actually was in the process of having a few babies. So my grad students got to travel the world to interview these young people. But these people actually really became inspirations for understanding the psychology of spiritual development. And what I observed across these young people, and they were very different faith traditions, like Sikh, Catholic, Protestant, Jewish agnostic, Jewish believing in God, atheist, Buddhist, humanistic, melting pot of a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And actually, I'll hold up the little bit of this, little bit of that guy. He came from Minnesota, so he wasn't international. He had a Catholic grandfather, and he had a Buddhist mentor in high school. And I think there was a Jewish strain in his family as well. But this young man started experiencing early in his life through volunteer service that he and the kids in Guatemala that he was working with or serving were really similar. And I just remember him saying, I just have more iPods than they do. This is back in the day of iPods. That was the only difference. Yeah, but we all play hacky sack. We all want friends. We all want belonging. And he was really remarkable in that he kind of discovered the sense of purpose early on. Now, what also was interesting about him was he had profound experiences in nature and profound cross-cultural experiences that really challenged him to say there's more. There's more than this material world. This is much easier for probably you and I to do in the context of religion because we have beliefs about a God and who Jesus is, but he didn't. So he had to work really hard to make sense of the beliefs about transcendence and what gave him meaning. And he actually talked about, he said his Judaism was like the pie shell, but he put all these different beliefs in, but he worked really hard to understand what he thought about transcendence and meaning and our obligation to one another. And for him, a whole moral code came out of this, of how he needed to act and care for people. And that is so profound because there's so many religious people who are handed behavioral beliefs and rules.
Here's the checklist.
Here's the checklist. And that becomes faith for them, is the checklist. Or it becomes resentful. But this young man at 17 really wove together this belief system, extracted an ethical code of how, and he lived it out. He actually went and served people. He helped people. And in that service, he became even more mindful of the bigness and vastness of this world that he felt called to serve. So it's this beautiful cycle of transcendence, identity, and action. And I find that people, and I might mention Martin Luther King, a young person who found his beliefs in Christianity, a faith in a God who loved him and called him, and he found agency in his service and leadership that continued to propel his identity and his further action.
I see this. You've just applied it to an individual, which I think is really cool. And then we talked briefly about how a church community or a congregation or probably any group could maybe incorporate those principles. What can I do as a parent or now as a grandparent to help not just say, here are the rules, as we talked about, but to actually encourage that thriving?
That's a great question. So one thing that our culture tends to do as Westerners is they like to teach. Like, here are the beliefs and here are the rules. What we don't do awesome at is inviting young children or adolescents into like wonder and awe, that kind of emotional reverence that we experience that as adults we probably cultivate over time. But, driving up to campus and seeing the mountains and having a moment to reflect on them and reflect on the Creator and express gratitude, in silence as we're driving, just for the gift of this profound beauty. But I think we often as religious people don't invoke beauty or see the meaning of beauty or see how beauty points us to truths and to God. Also parents in allowing for those emotional experiences, inviting kids, like younger kids, into like imagination and telling stories. Their imagination is so ripe of like, where is God in your life? Or like letting them tell stories. It doesn't have to be absolutely accurate, but that's kind of their language of that age. And weaving God into their stories and your Latter-day Saints traditions into their stories. Like, where does that show up? Like, why do we pray? Yeah. Why do we do these things? And
you mentioned that we might see them so often we forget to be in awe of them.
Absolutely. Yeah, you get to drive up and down these roads all the time.
So tell me if this is what you're talking about. We have a little boy who's a foster child who is in our neighborhood. Great kid. So sharp. And so he comes to church. And he's learning, there's God. Oh, well, great. And so they asked him, he's just 10. But for whatever reason, someone in the leadership said, would you say the opening prayer? Like, not in the kids thing, but in the big thing. He walks up to the pulpit, bows his head, and he says, hello, Heavenly Father.
Oh, my gosh. So great.
And then just starts talking. And I mean, we're all a little stunned because that's not the traditional way.
The
way. And yet I thought, wow, I just suddenly felt like God is right here with us because of how that little kid, because it's so new to him. Is that he still, is that awe or that presence?
Yes, and that attachment to God.
Yeah.
Like it's a real relationship for him, and that's how he talks to God. And we've been so trained, but we don't necessarily bring our authentic self when we're being so formal. And doing things the right way. And I really believe God.
And it's not like we're trying to fake it, is it?
No.
It's just that we're trying to do as it's done.
Right.
Or what?
Right. And there was probably some great learning about how to do it. But like, so in the fire situation, like, I've had some exchanges with God. I'm not happy about this. I don't get it. I have felt despair, fragmentation.
Yeah.
I'm a very empathetic person, so I feel my friends' loss. I feel my community's loss. I've been called to speak a lot, and I'm writing a lot and podcasting. So my job's kind of changed in the last month. I'm exhausted. But so like, how do I show up that way to God? I know that God embraces me and holds me in my disheveledness. And actually having moments where I think I was like, so like from trauma, just in shock, like my beliefs are that like, even when I don't feel like I know myself, God knows me and is holding me. And I can rest and not be frantic that I'm not getting my book done, and know that God has got this process.
Wow. And to be in that kind of emotional or psychological state and people saying, hey, expert, fix this for us. Talk to us. Make us feel like...
Yeah. What practice should I do? Yeah. Which is awesome. And for me, it's so meaningful to be able to serve and be helpful and be a steward of 25 years of research and training. And so that action, my response is very meaningful to me. And I just love that your church had the vision to invite this young boy to lead and serve. And so I was going to say that's something else we can do for kids is that engagement, not just have them be receivers of faith, but also enact it. Volunteering, caring, speaking, leading, singing, and giving them a sense of agency and ownership of their own faith experience.
Good. any of the topics that I have down here, you're someone I could just say, let's just take this one and drill down. But I'm going to move ahead, not because I want to, but because there's good stuff to talk about. And I want to mention that you are the host of a podcast now in its second season called With and For.
Yes.
So we heard in an announcement of a recent talk you gave, there was a quote, and I think I'm quoting you. Oh, well, they're talking about you. He says, her theologically and psychologically informed approach to thriving involves becoming whole with and for others and God. Tell me about that.
Awesome. Yeah, that's like a lot of the heart of it. So yes, as I mentioned, I have a background in Christian theology and also developmental psychology. And I think psychology is generally somewhat, what is the word I'm looking for? I'm having a moment.
That's fine.
Descriptive. So psychology is a descriptive science. We describe what is occurring. We observe things, behaviors. What happens when this boy speaks? Whereas theology is more prescriptive of like what should be. So when we talk about thriving, there's a lot of subjective of like, well, what's good? You know, thriving, like if you look up in Webster's, thriving is like vigorous growth. So, well, growth is good. Like we love growth.
The tomatoes are thriving.
Yeah, they're thriving.
Look at them.
Right. But humans thriving, like not all growth is good growth. Like if I'm growing in my capacities to cheat and lie and deceive, you know, maybe in some people's worldview, that's good growth. Maybe that's resourcefulness. But so whose worldview defines thriving? There's a very elaborate way in psychology to get there, that there is this need to have ongoing environments that bring out the best in people. So we need generous people who will contribute to those environments. And we need a moral and spiritual side to motivate us and guide us in that contribution. But there's also a theological approach. And I go to Christian, like Trinitarian anthropology and like a Christological anthropology. And for listeners who are like, I don't want to hear about theology, that's like, in the Bible, we're told that Jesus is the perfect image of God. And we are also told to be conformed to Christ and become more Christ-like. So there's something about thriving that has to do with becoming more like Jesus, following the ways of Christ, embodying the virtues and character strengths of Christ. But there's
this is that difference you referred to earlier about thriving is not just, wow, I've doubled my 401k.
Right. I'm just growing up the ladder, more publications in my world. It's, yes, there is this, I guess you could say, moral or spiritual component to it. But I also, and I don't always feel like religion gets this right, in the Bible it's very clear that we are uniquely made, that we are fearful and wonderfully made creations, the Psalm says. We all are given unique spiritual gifts in the Epistle to the Corinthians. And so, although we're called to be conformed to Christ, we're not called to uniformity. We all become like Jesus as our own selves. So if everybody on campus was like Steve, like you'd have a lot of great podcasts, but you wouldn't have the scholars or the preachers or the...
Yeah, and all the mechanical elements
and the mechanicals, the Heathers and the
apart.
Jordans. Yes, exactly. So, but I think often in religious circles, especially in eras, there is a pressure to conform, to behave the right way. But this gets overly prescriptive and doesn't celebrate people's uniqueness. And I often find that religious communities don't often really empower people to like live into who God made them to be, to claim that. Their foibles, but you're still trying to become like Christ. And then the third aspect in the Trinity, we understand that they're relational. So we are relational people.
Can I talk about that uniqueness
Yeah,
or ask you about
please.
it? I don't know why. Forgive me.
No.
Mariah Carey is popping into my mind. It's not even Christmas. But so a lot of young kids, just because I grew up in music, they try and sing and they think, oh, I don't sound good because I'm listening to Mariah Carey. That's good. When I open my mouth, that's not what's coming out. And it's this process where they have to figure out, I can be good at singing and not sound like whoever it might be. I don't know why Mariah Carey popped into my mind. But that is, I don't even know if all of us as adults, or I should just say, I don't think I completely understand that concept of there is a part of what Christ and what God wants to develop in me that is unique. And as I do that, I'm not going to be able to say, oh, good, I'm like everybody else.
Right.
And other people may look at me and go, oh, is he going off the rails?
Right. And that's like, I mean, part of, I think, spiritual maturity and spiritual growth is developing that internal compass where you know your true north. And that's discerned with other people through your belief system and with God. But like I was having a conversation with students here this morning, and a young woman was asking about, like, how do you have a family and be an academic? And I told her, like, I had to create, and it took a lot of work, and I have to keep updating it, my own internal compass that is not shared by the academy. I worked half-time most of my tenured life, and so my publication record isn't what it would have been if I had been working full-time. But I am so grateful for the opportunity of being able to spend that time with my family. Yeah. So we all, I really feel like, have to claim who God made us to be and live into that. And that doesn't mean we're at like some, I have to figure out what I can perform the best in. Because then again, we're using like a cultural metric of like, oh, if I just discover my strength, then I'm going to make $1 zillion or impact 1 zillion lives. We have to trust that God's made us who we are for purposes that may be beyond ourselves. So the with in the thriving with and for is, so becoming whole is so much to becoming your whole, unique, authentic self. The with is we're relational human beings. Theology tells us that. Psychology demonstrates that. We need others.
We die if we're
alone.
Die.
We literally die if we're alone. Babies die without emotion and contact and care. And so our means of development, and I would say our ends, our goals, are relational. Like, so I've written a book or co-written a book called The Reciprocating Self, as like the purpose of development is to become a person who is fully themselves, but fully connected with others and fully connected with God, if that's your thing. It's my thing. So we grow with people, with God, and for others and for God. And so that for aspect is the purpose for which we live. And that purpose is kind of that inner compass, that true north of what are we ultimately living for? Is it, and I believe unique expression is part of that. Like we could say, oh, we live to glorify God. Well, yes, we do. Sure.
But how?
But how? How do you, Steve, do that? How do you advance God's kingdom?
You're making me actually kind of excited to notice what people around me are doing and thinking that is how they glorify God.
Absolutely. Okay, let me give you a lens of joy. Start observing what brings people joy around you, like true joy, like what really delights them. And reflect on, where have you experienced joy in your life? Like from like the minutia of like things you do, like that maybe not be the most profound enduring joy, but also those beliefs, like in this fire situation, like I have to have a hopeful future, a vision for the hopeful future, and belief in God's ongoing work in this world that will redeem, that will rebuild. And I have some sense of anticipation and delight about what that will be, but it's going to be really hard to get there. Yeah. So, but when we become aware of joy in our lives, the relationships, the connections, the activities, the work, the purposes, the beliefs, that becomes a real through line to where I
see people feeling that perhaps as they're collecting things, like or getting those buckets from their swimming pools, which is a true David and Goliath sort of. I mean, that's not even the right proportion, but there's got to be some sort, even if they don't think of it at the moment, they have banded together to accomplish this thing. I mean, there are just so many ways.
Yeah. Well, and that's where I would love to see churches and faith communities go, is like, how do we activate people into their unique purposes for a greater shared purpose? Yeah. And so like people coming together around a shared purpose is so powerful. Like to watch Pasadena, Altadena, that's where I live. Then there's the Palisades, the other side of town. I know it's happening there too. But to watch strangers, people of different socioeconomic, color of skin, walk of life, come together for a purpose of helping has been so wonderful. I mean, that doesn't want to romanticize the tragedy and catastrophe, but...
No, but it's a way to find a glimmer, I guess. So you've talked about individual journeys and ways of glorifying God. And seriously, I mean, this is this little switch you flipped in my brain. This is why you're a teacher, because I'm thinking of my kids and some different things going on with them. They're grown-ups, mostly. Occasionally.
We're still all on the journey.
We're still all there.
I'm 56. I'm still growing up.
So you were here on campus talking to the BYU students, who by and large are members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or LDS. So you're talking about spiritual health from an LDS perspective, curious how students' research and her research inform different areas of spiritual health. Now, you've looked at different... So I'm guessing, and you're the person more likely to know, that different traditions do different parts of this well. And I wonder, if, could you highlight a few of those?
Sure, absolutely. So on the Thrive Center website, which is thethrivecenter.org, you can find this framework. And I present it in a lens with 6 facets. And I like the idea of a lens because it's kind of like how you can view the world. And the facets... Do you spell thrive? So there's a THRIVE, trying to resist being corny, but it just works really well. And the first T is transcendence. And so, across religious traditions, we all have our own versions of transcendence or worldviews. So, in our case, we have a sense of a metaphysical other. We have a belief in a God. One of the conversations that was fascinating to me was the role of ancestors in LDS traditions, of there's a sense of connection to something more than us right here. That provides meaning. It's a source of hope. It offers direction. And that's really powerful. I was also commenting, I grew up in a church that was predominantly white, middle class, but we had a sister church that was predominantly African American, and we would trade going to worship services occasionally. Well, they did aroused emotions through singing.
Yeah.
Really a lot better than us Presbyterians. In the Protestant church, Presbyterians are nicknamed the frozen chosen. We're very proper. We make decisions through committees. We do not do transcendence well. But this elevated, exciting feelings, which are great because God wants us to feel joy. When I see the mountains, I'm elevated. I'm thinking bigger than myself. So those are all different ways that people can kind of experience transcendence. And there's a lot of beliefs that go around transcendence, but there are emotions. The second H is habits and rhythms. And that is very general. All spiritual traditions have practices and rhythms of celebration, special holidays, Christmas, Sabbath, rest. But these are really important to thriving. I really believe God is take a seat. Humans, you need that. Let me be God, occasionally. You take a chill pill occasionally. And I'm really bad at that. I will confess that, another practice. But we have practices of prayer, scripture reading, silence, worship. These practices all help cultivate our spiritual strengths, our connection to God, our understanding of virtue, etc. The third is R for relationships and community. And as I said, we are relational people. We need a community of people. We need the relationships to support us in our journeys of faith, whether as examples, people to call us out, people to affirm us and say, Steve, I just saw your eyes light up. You dig this. You like interviewing people. And you know what? You have a great voice for it. It's very calming. I'm experiencing that now.
Thank you. And by the way, if I close my eyes, I'm interviewing Lauren Bacall. You may have heard that before. That's pretty cool.
I haven't. I'll have to ask more about that.
You've got a great voice.
Well, what's so funny is when you brought up my Mariah Carey in singing, I'm tone deaf. I have had, for various reasons, I've needed to sing in situations, and I can't. I have literally been told, even God likes your voice, Pam. But it preaches well, and it speaks well. So I waited a long time for my voice to be redeemed, but it works in podcasting.
But
it's unusually low. So people, we need people.
Yeah.
We need community. I is a little unusual. It's for identity. And I also throw in narrative. And that is that uniqueness part. I really believe that healthy spirituality affirms that we are unique people, that we have strengths, we have weaknesses. I'm tone deaf. My way of serving God is not leading the choir. Part of our faith journey is discovering that uniqueness and our identity. But our identity just can't be focused on ourselves. It really needs to be woven into a larger narrative. And faith gives this eternal story for us to participate in. And so the V then is vocation and purpose. And our purpose is often found in that narrative of like, how does podcasting, broadcasting, doing communications, how is that part of the narrative of the Latter-day Saints? How is that helping? Like, that's part of the story. And that's really cool. It's not just advancing your career or giving you a paycheck so your ends meet or your kids can go to college, but it's got a big purpose. And so that larger narrative helps understand our identity.
Yeah.
And people don't often emphasize that in spirituality.
Yeah. For me, it's to use the word lens, it's me holding a lens and you are reflecting something that I want to bounce like, isn't this great, guys? Look, I'm going to move this little mirror around till it shines on everybody if I can. Right. Because what's coming from you is enlightening. And it's a joy to be the person holding the mirror a little bit.
That's awesome. Well, I'm so many. That brings me joy to hear that. But so in my tradition, there's not a lot around discernment or vocational discernment unless you like go to seminary. And then, like, if you're in an ordination process, these people come around you and help you discern your call and what type of ministry you might be in. But the average person attending, like, a Protestant congregation, there's not a lot of emphasis on what's your purpose for God. Like, oh, I know you're an architect or you're a therapist or whatever, but, like, come here and learn Scripture and, you know, get your 3-point sermon and go forth. But not, like, embracing, like, this, like, your identity and the sense of call in your life. So I think some traditions could do that better than others. Yeah. Okay, the last one, E, it's the non-sexy one. It's ethics. And people are always like, well, why do you have to talk about ethics? And I like to say ethics and virtue. But faith traditions give us a way of living. And it somewhat might evolve throughout history of what is the right way to act or behave. But
yeah, not every list of do's and don'ts is bad. That it's a list.
Right. And so again, like, you know, and then I'm trying to create a framework or offer a framework for different traditions that might have different issues around food or relationships or behaviors that are appropriate or not for different reasons. But ultimately, Steve, these facets all need to connect us to love. So, like, if your vision of God is not a loving God, but a shaming God or a punishing God, literally the research shows spiritual practices that connect you with that shaming, punishing God are terrible for your mental health. They will increase your anxiety and depression. But if you can understand and experience God as a loving God, a life-giving God, that's really powerful. And so the ethics become how we live out that love in the world. That's how I understand ethics and virtues. Is like, how can I be more effectively God's loving presence?
I really like that. Virtue, I guess I pictured Lancelot, like that virtue was, you know, just something that he accrued unto himself and just carried it around a lot. And then it sort of cracked.
Yes, right.
And so the idea that virtue, as we might apply it to different areas, connects us to love. That sounds healthier.
Yeah. Well, can I elaborate on that?
Please. No, we've had enough.
By the time people get to E, they're like, but no, virtue. And it's a little heady. But like, if you take this idea of living out, like, we receive love from God. So we lean into love. I mean, from a psychological perspective, our brains, when we're loved, are awesome. We're more creative. We're more freed up. We're more agentic. But then we also need to live out the love. So that was like when I said kids should serve the young boy in your church. Like, he got to be God's loving presence, offering a prayer. So if we think of the virtues as living out love, like compassion is like enables us to have God's love for other people. Perseverance is a virtue that enables us to push through and have fortitude of doing those things that we believe God is calling us to. Hope is having hope in that what God wants us to be about will happen. And so all these virtues can be like connected to God's love and living that out. Yeah.
You have talked about this, but how different environments can promote thriving for diverse people. What should we know if we want to contribute? I've learned certain things in my own tradition. But what if I want to contribute to more than just my small tribe? How do we learn that with? Because we can't all have a PhD in psychology and theology and...
Right. So let's keep it simple. Maybe not simple. Love is never simple. But let's go back to that. Like, how do we offer love wherever we are? Whether it's in your own tribe or, I'm guessing the podcasts that you create and produce, you hope to be helpful.
Right.
To probably enable people to thrive in some, like understand life, discover more meaning, live more effectively or with more joy or have more regulation.
Yeah, and maybe even develop some empathy or love for people they've never met, a kind of people.
Exactly. And the reality is, like, there's so much research. Humans thrive, they become more fully alive when they live among heterogeneity, when there's diversity. When you are only with people with your perspective, you don't grow. And we get dopamine. Like, we feel good when we grow. Like, our age, we should always have a new habit. Like, I loved one of the students today is like, I'm taking Arabic. It's kind of an expensive hobby, but I just love it. Like, I don't know if you surf, but like, I'm like, okay, at 56, I need a new thing because I need to keep my brain moving. And I like the dopamine of the newness, because that makes us feel good.
Yeah, I'm studying Spanish every day.
There you go.
Because bien, gracias. Because a few years ago we moved to a different part of town, and at least a fifth, maybe a quarter of my neighbors all speak Spanish, and I like waving to them. But I want to ask how they are, and what about your daughter? And yeah, that's been a cool thing. I'm not going fast, but I'm going.
Yeah, but okay, that is a beautiful example of contributing to your environment, your neighborhood, which I think is absolutely an overlooked thing in the USA right now. We used to like live and know our neighbors, but we don't always now. But there you are creating empathy and connection in this physical environment of your neighborhood. That's a really beautiful way to create an environment that people can thrive because they matter. Yeah. They'll experience that they matter. This man is taking Spanish with his decaying brain. Just kidding. I don't want to make that comment.
So we had for Father's Day, we walked out of church and the weather was good. We went to the pavilion that's on the lawn there for outdoor stuff for kids, and we had pie. It was pies for pops or something like that, So my neighbor, who only speaks Spanish, mostly, is eating a particular pie. And I'm over there looking up how do you say pecan pie, and I practice it 3 times. I walk over and I say, is pecan pie your favorite pie?
In Spanish.
In Spanish.
Wow.
But I've been practicing like 10 times, over and over, so it could just flow. And it was so fun that he kind of lit up and he turned to me and he just launched in like, well, yes, but then he started naming other pies he might like better. And I was sort of like, Sorry.
I'm in over my head at this point.
I have given the wrong impression. I can say pecan. And then he just laughed, but we kind of bonded even over that. That was a fun thing.
It's really special. I honestly think the greatest gift we can give another human is letting them experience being seen and that they're known and that they matter. And that you practiced 10 times, looked up, on Google Translate or whatever app you're using, how to say pecan pie. Like that gesture was really affirming for him. And you couldn't follow up, but that will come.
No, then I had to follow in really a bad accent. I am learning with Duolingo. And that's what made him laugh. Like, oh, obviously.
That's so great. That's really wonderful. Well, I just think at the end of the day, and the beginning of the day, enabling others to know they're known and loved and matter is so valuable. And at the end of the day and the beginning of the day, I hope that is where faith traditions enable people to do that between themselves and God and themselves and their community. People should feel loved, whether they're struggling with mental health issues or neurodiverse or have different disabilities, that people are loved for who they are.
That's a really lovely place to end. So what should I have asked you, Pam, that I don't know to ask? Is there something we've missed? What you've shared is so inspiring and lovely. There may not be anything.
Yeah, no, I think we covered great ground. I really do. I do. I'm glad I got a little joy in there because that wasn't necessarily on your list, but I think that's really helpful.
But that kind of lit me up with a new way of thinking.
Say one more thing about joy if you want. Please. I'll just try and keep it really short. Joy is something that I have studied and am going back to writing about right now. But sometimes I love to offer the metaphor of life as a joyride. And often in the U.S., we think of joyrides as like frivolous, adventurous, high thrill. We may or may not really know the people in the stolen car or whatever, like the Hollywood stereotypes. But joy in our life is really fueled by love. Mm-hmm. And love does so many awesome things to our brain. It really does motivate us and activate us. So when we can like dial into that sense of purpose that I was talking about and that compass, that really directs the direction of our joyride. It guides us. So when we can dial into joy, what really gives us joy, those beliefs, those moral convictions come into play, and that directs us on where we go. And the love that we experience with the people, our peloton, the people on the journey with us, the people we're caring for, that the things we love and enjoy doing, that really helps fuel us on the way. And I think joy is absolutely an overlooked construct. I think it feels like a luxury, but it's really important. And when we get stuck, when we're depressed, when we're clinically depressed, it may not work, but when we're off or feeling off the road, like just dialing into where we feel joy, in what relationships, what activities, that can really help us get moving again.
Thank you very much. Your joy is contagious. Dr. Pamela Ebstyne King is an author. She is a professor. She is a podcaster. And I think just adding to the list, she is a surfer, I've learned. And
just once, experiment.
But here she is, having lived through that experience. And thank you for speaking with me today in good faith.
Oh, it's been wonderful. Thank you for listening in good faith. Just such a great experience. Thank you.